Hello, everyone, and welcome to Thursdays Live with Chugh. Each week, we cover pressing topics that matter to you and your business. My name is Arianna Gonzalez. I'm the Client Services Manager here at Chugh Attorneys and CPAs. Please join me in welcoming partner and attorney Angelita Chavez from our Kennewick, Washington office. Hi there, Angelita, and welcome.
Hi, Arianna. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being here and taking the time to speak with us. So for today's topic, we will be talking about DACA and immigration options for dreamers. Once again, right before we start, quick disclaimer, I'd like to remind you all that we are live on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. This conversation is for informational purposes only and does not create an attorney-client relationship. Please send us any questions you may have at info@chugh.com, and we're happy to help you out in any way that we can. So once again, thank you, Angelita, for sharing your expertise with us and being here and taking the time. I know you have quite a bit of experience with DACA, so let's start with the basics. What is DACA and what type of benefits does DACA provide?
Sure. Thank you, Arianna. So DACA is a program that was initially brought about in 2012 under the Obama administration. This is essentially just executive action. It's commonly known as DACA, and the Obama administration issued there was a memo that was issued on June 15, 2012, that essentially brought about the program. If you were granted DACA, you would be granted DACA for 2 years, and along with DACA, you would also be able to get employment authorization. The basics of how you would qualify for DACA is that you had to have arrived in the United States prior to the age of 16 as of June 15, 2012. You had to be under age 31 as of that date, as well as have continuous presence in the United States 5 years prior to June 15, 2012. So essentially from 2007 forward, as well as be physically present on that date of that memo and also have no lawful status as of the date of the memo. Some additional requirements for qualifying for this program included having either continually being in school, such as high school or college, but also it could also be graduating from high school, getting your GED, being honorably discharged, those sorts of things. Those were the educational requirements. And last but not least, folks have to not have committed any felonies, no significant misdemeanors, or 3 or more misdemeanors in order to qualify. So there's a lot of great benefits for anybody who was an early arrival to the U.S. and did not have lawful status, to be able to have deferral or removal for that period of time, as well as a potential employment authorization if they met the right age requirements. But again, as with any kind of benefit in immigration, everything has its own risks, right? So for a lot of folks that did have DACA, maybe it also was exposure to DHS for the very first time. But there are also those benefits, including that deferral, removal, as well as employment authorization. So those are just kind of the basics of qualifying for the DACA program.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that insight. So at least 16 years old, no harsh criminal backgrounds. That's important. So make sure you guys keep that in mind. Does DACA provide a path to permanent resident status or citizenship?
Yeah, that's a great question. So because DACA is just an executive action that was issued through policy memo, it actually didn't, the original program never even went through the Administrative Procedures Act. So this is actually not a lawful non-immigrant status that you would think about, for example, like as if you were a visitor to the United States on a valid visitor visa, or for example, having H-1B employment authorization, or L employment authorization. So or even asylum status, right? It's really not an actual non-immigrant status. It is really just a deferral of removal that is being granted for certain subsets of people. And because you have deferral of removal, you are also eligible to apply for employment authorization, but it is not an actual non-immigrant status, and therefore it would not qualify someone to be able to change statuses to something else, nor would it qualify somebody to directly adjust status just by virtue of having DACA.
Perfect. Thank you so much for providing that information. So in short, no, DACA does not provide a path to permanent resident status or citizenship.
Yes.
One more thing. So do DACA recipients continue to accrue unlawful presence once their requests for DACA are filed and pending with immigration?
Yeah, so DACA, again, because it is not a non-immigrant status type of type of immigration benefit, it actually doesn't stop the clock in terms of accruing unlawful presence that would happen. Let's say you were a student and who is now changing statuses to a visitor, for example, in the United States. If you timely filed your change of status from student to visitor, even if your student status would expire, you generally are not accruing unlawful presence while that status is pending. Similarly, for H-1B workers, for example, if they timely file an extension of their H-1B status prior to the expiration of their current status and their new one is pending, they're not accruing unlawful presence during the pendency of that application. Well, DACA is not the same because, again, it is a deferral or removal. It is not actual non-immigrant status. And therefore, even if your DACA is pending with immigration, if your current DACA expires, at that point in time, you're now starting the clock again on that accrual of unlawful presence. So super important to be able to maintain that and have the benefit approved prior to the expiration of the current status.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that insight. So it's important to remember not to let our DACA expire. So speaking of unauthorized presence, when should DACA renewals be filed so that we make sure we don't have that period of unlawful presence?
Yeah, so immigration generally recommends that you don't wait until, the very last minute to file that extension because of this reason, right? There's no guarantee that your benefit is going to be approved before you expire. So a really good rule of thumb to keep in mind for renewals is that once you're about 150 to 120 days prior to the expiration of your current status, to go ahead and get that application for extension filed then and there so that you don't have to, hopefully that should be sufficient time for immigration to be able to process that benefit. Obviously, there's no guarantee that it will, but generally they will tend to try to do that. And if so, then you're less likely to have a situation in which your DACA has expired, because once it expires, your employment authorization also expires. So if you have a job, you might have to stop working until the new employment authorization comes in. So as you can imagine, that would create a bit of a hardship for folks. So super important to timely file. Don't wait till the last minute.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing that information. So make sure you guys are filing before your expiration of your current status so that you don't run into any trouble with that. So you did mention ability to travel while on DACA. Can you discuss this a little bit more?
Sure, yes. So that there is a possibility to be able to apply for what's called advanced parole while you have DACA. So advanced parole is something that most folks might be familiar with if they ever applied for a green card. They were able to get advanced parole authorization when they are applying for their green card. But this is advanced parole based on DACA, which means that there are more limitations in terms of how you can be able to apply for or to qualify for this travel authorization. What it means is that you're getting permission from the government to be able to potentially depart the United States and come back without impacting your status. But unfortunately, under DACA, you have to meet certain requirements. That means that you would only be granted ability to travel if you have a humanitarian type of reason. Maybe it's for education, such as study abroad. That's a very common need to travel to go to a study abroad program, as well as, for example, employment. For example, you might have like some sort of training that you need to do somewhere else, or your employer needs to send you somewhere to complete some sort of training. That would be another valid reason to be able to get DACA. Under the humanitarian reasons, you could imagine like having a very sick relative or someone that needs care abroad that you have to go and see them because they're very sick. That could be another reason to be able to get granted that travel authorization.
Perfect. So you can travel while on DACA. You just need to be approved. In your experience, are they lenient with approvals, or is it more of just if you have a good reason and your employer is supporting it, then you can go? Is that typically how it works?
Sure. So you don't want to travel without having that authorization granted. Even if you file it, you shouldn't be traveling. Once you travel, you are triggering potentially triggering a bar. You could be, many issues. You might be able to just be stuck out there and not be able to come back. So you do have to wait until the advanced parole is granted. Generally, they will be granted as long as you meet the requirements. So it's really just a matter of making sure that you're meeting the requirements, you're providing the evidence regarding that humanitarian need. So if it's a sick relative, you have your medical records, proof of your relationship, legal relationship with that person. If it's for study abroad, you have all the documentation regarding that. If it's for work, you have the same, documentation to support that. So they should be granted if you meet the requirements.
Perfect. Great to hear. Thank you so much for that insight. So if I am currently outside of the United States, can I still apply for DACA, and how would I do so?
Yeah, that's another great question. Unfortunately, no. DACA requires physical presence in the United States. That's not something I mentioned earlier, but you have to be physically present in the United States to be able to get that benefit, not just in the beginning of DACA when the first program first came out, but for all of the renewals as well. You have to be physically in the United States in order to be able to apply for that extension. So if you're out, unfortunately, it's pretty much a bad situation.
Okay, thank you for that information. So you do need to be in the United States. So what happens if I, for example, lose my job, or I might need to change jobs while I'm on DACA? How would this affect my status?
Yeah, so having a job or losing your job does not affect DACA status. DACA status, again, is just deferral removal. So because of that, the employment authorization that's attached to your DACA is not attached to any particular employer. It's just employment authorization in general, which means that you can work for any employer. You can look for any kind of job, any other valid type of job that may be out there, and it doesn't have to be tied to any particular employer. So just losing your job is not necessarily going to have a direct impact on your DACA necessarily. However, you do have to show the need and ability to work in order to qualify for that employment authorization.
Perfect. Thank you for that information. I know a lot of people might be in the process of switching jobs while on DACA, and it might be a little worrisome for them. They might be curious about what's happening with their status. So thank you so much for explaining that to us. One more question. So can I apply for a driver's license while on DACA, and what are the requirements for doing so?
Yeah, driver's licenses are issued state by state. So each state will have their own requirements in terms of how to meet residency requirements, how to meet identity requirements. So you actually have to check with your state Department of Licensing or DMV, whatever that agency is called in your own state, and they will have those requirements. Generally, DACA is a valid government issued, having employment authorization under DACA will be considered a valid government issued identification document that could potentially serve for purposes of obtaining driver's licenses. Obviously, you have to meet your state's requirements. So that's really more of a matter of checking with your state government licensing agency so that you can meet the requirements that they provide. And generally, a lot of states do take employment authorization as a valid form. But again, it's state by state, so you'd really have to look at your own local rules for that. I think you're muted, Arianna. I'm so sorry.
Thank you, Angelita. Perfect. So thank you for that answer. And just a quick disclaimer for all of those who are just joining us. Today, we are talking about DACA and immigration options for Dreamers. Just a quick reminder, we are live on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube at the moment. This conversation is for informational purposes only and does not create an attorney-client relationship. Please send us any questions you guys have at info@chugh.com, and we're happy to help you in any way that we can. Back to the discussion. Thank you again, Angelita, for being here. So next question, what is the history of legal challenges against DACA, and what does this mean for the status of DACA now?
Yeah, wow. So these are big questions. Unfortunately, there's just a lot of challenges that have happened, and it's sometimes difficult to keep track. So I'll do my very best. So the prior administration did attempt to end the DACA program, the 2012 DACA program, as it was issued under the Janet Napolitano's memo in 2012. So in 2017, the Duke memo was issued as in an effort to rescind the DACA program at that point in time. As a result of this Duke memo to end the program, there were numerous lawsuits that ensued that lawsuits were filed to preserve the program and to challenge the rescission of the DACA program. So in 2018, there was an injunction to to issue and process renewals of DACA. In 2012, the Supreme Court did weigh in on the rescission of with the Duke memo, and the Supreme Court found that that the Trump administration did not provide adequate justification for ending the DACA program, and they were allowing DACA program to remain in place. In 2012, there was another attempt to terminate the program. Then we had, as a result of that, the Vidal case in 2020, in which the court reordered the reopening of the DACA program on its terms as they were prior to September 2017. So you can see all of this, back and forth, right, with like challenges and lawsuits and trying to preserve the program and trying to end the program. So the latest on this has really been since 2021, which there was another legal challenge to end the DACA program that went to the U.S. District Court, in which held that the 2012 program, as it was issued, was unlawful and did not follow the APA before its implementation. So this finding held that that DHS would no longer be approving new DACA applications, which is still currently what it is today. The judge did stay the portion of the decision for the current recipients, meaning that even though they're not accepting new DACA applications, they're still able to renew existing DACA applications for current people, for the current DACA holders. So obviously the Biden administration did appeal the decision, and then in August, the Biden administration also decided to issue an actual notice of their new rule. They issued it. They actually published it in the Federal Register. So they did go through that process in order to try to safeguard DACA. And then on October 2012, the court issued a decision on Biden's appeal, finding that the 2012 program for DACA was in fact unlawful. But the interesting thing about the Fifth Circuit decision is that they actually did not rule on Biden's law. They did not rule on Biden's new DACA rule, if that makes any sense. So they issued their decision only as per the 2012 memorandum and the DACA program as it was during that point in time. But they decided not to issue a decision on the Biden's published rule for DACA, and instead they sent the case back. So that's still on hold, and we don't know really what's going to happen with that. The most recent news on DACA is that a group of states have filed a summary judgment motion asking a federal judge to give the Biden administration 2 years to end the DACA program. So as of now, the Fifth Circuit has yet to rule on the Biden's published DACA rule, and current DACA recipients are able to continue to file renewals of their DACA, and they can also continue to get employment authorizations. But anyone who never had DACA in the past, unfortunately, they are not able to have any approvals on their cases. So this is essentially where we're at as of today.
Thank you so much for diving into deep detail on those challenges with DACA and what your thoughts are on it and what's going on now and what you think for the future. Thank you so much for that, Angelita. So what do you think will happen in the Fifth Circuit? I know you were talking a little bit about that, so maybe we can dive into that a little bit more. And what are your thoughts on that, your opinions on what's going to happen with that?
Yeah, so, well, we really don't know. We don't know what's going to happen in terms of the final DACA rule. However, legal experts and other experts do expect that the Judge Hainan, who's the one who's going to be hearing this, will also find that Biden's new DACA rule was unlawful, just as he found that the 2012 rule was unlawful. So that's what is expected according to other legal experts in the area and policy experts. And if this happens, unfortunately, hundreds of thousands of recipients could potentially lose their employment authorization and protection of deferral of removal. So that's very unfortunate if that does occur.
That does sound pretty unfortunate. So everyone, please keep in mind what we're talking about here. Make sure you are taking the necessary steps in case this program does end. So Angelita, what are the options for Dreamers if this program were to end? What can they do?
So every person's situation is going to be different, and it's very case specific. But generally, if we think about the population of DACA recipients, their background when they came to the United States, they may have other options for obtaining permanent residency, even if it's not a direct path because they have DACA. So they might have other alternatives, other options. In fact, if you think about it, the average age of most DACA recipients when they came to the United States is age 7. So these folks have been here pretty much all of their lives, right? And a lot of them might have obtained DACA prior to turning age 18, which is the age in which unauthorized presence begins to accrue or to count against you for most people. So because of these reasons and because of the type of population that we're dealing with being, children who arrived without status or maybe their status expired while they were children, these folks may potentially have other options. And so it's really important to talk to an attorney, to have a one-to-one consultation, to really dig into your own individual background to see if there might be something that you qualify. So I'm just going to cover a few general ideas that may be available out there for folks. One of them would be a family-based options. Potentially somebody who is on DACA might have traveled on advance parole and therefore, and maybe they are married to a U.S. citizen, and that person might be able to potentially file for them, and they might be able to get a green card and qualify for legal permanent resident status if they were able to travel on advance parole. Again, it depends on their background, making sure that there's no other issues of inadmissibility or anything like that. Other potential options could be through consular processing. Some folks might even be able to have hardship. Their U.S. citizen spouses might be suffering hardship, and that even if they don't qualify to adjust in the United States, they might be able to travel abroad through the waiver process and be able to get an approval of their immigrant visa if they don't have other issues of inadmissibility. A program that sometimes folks hear about and think about might be the 245I eligibility, and this is a family and employment-based sponsorship possibility for folks. 245I enables people who would not normally qualify for a green card or for lawful permanent residence, because and if they qualify under 245I, it doesn't matter how they entered the U.S., whether they worked without authorization or whether they have unlawful presence or they were not able to maintain their status after entry. And this is only for folks who either had a family-based or employment-based or perm filed for them and was approvable prior to April 30th, 2001. So that's the 245I eligibility. Sometimes folks do qualify for that, especially if they were a derivative on someone else's family-based petition prior to 2001, maybe their parent. They might have a 245I eligibility and they just have no idea because they haven't talked to anyone to find out, right? So that's why it's so super important to do that. Other options are humanitarian options. The U visa exists for victims of crimes. This is a visa that if somebody was a victim of a certain qualifying crime, they cooperated with the authorities. They were able to be helpful, and the authorities could certify that they were helpful, and you suffered substantial harm as a result of this crime, and you don't have other issues of inadmissibility, you could potentially qualify for a U visa that, if granted, eventually, after many, many years, might lead to lawful permanent resident status. Unfortunately, with the U visa, it's only about 10,000 granted every year. So there's a huge backlog on that, which is why it takes many years for the processing and adjudication. But it is an option for victims of certain qualifying crimes that people should not be afraid to call the police, not be afraid to report, a crime, so that they can not only get help and justice for what occurred for them, but they could also potentially might qualify for lawful permanent resident status in the future. The other potential option is for victims of substantial battery or extreme cruelty, and this is for folks who were maybe married or have a parent or a child who is an abuser, who was the abuser, and who inflicted that extreme battery and cruelty against them, and they suffered substantial harm as a result. Those folks might qualify for what's called VAWA self-petitions, and that does lead to a lawful permanent resident status. And last but not least, I know I'm talking a lot, but there might be a potential employment-based options available. But again, it really depends on your status. Your background, your history, eligibility. Because for employment-based cases, you cannot have more than 180 days of unauthorized presence or unauthorized employment. And because DACA is not considered a non-immigrant status, unfortunately, there's no direct way to file for a green card with DACA through the employment-based option.
Thank you so much, Angelita, for going over all of those options and different ways people can, make sure that they can still stay in the United States, just in case the DACA thing does pass. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. One more, we do have a question in the comments, so I do want to ask that to you. But right before, I just want to mention once again, I'd like to remind you all that this conversation is only for informational purposes and does not create an attorney-client relationship. Please send us any questions at info@chugh.com and we'll be happy to help you out. So let me ask you this question that we have in the comments before we end our call. So what are the eligibility criteria for DACA and what documents do we need to provide to prove the eligibility?
Yeah, so because USCIS is not accepting new DACA applications, this is not something that you can do now, but it does require showing, let's say they were to reinstate the processing and approvals of initial DACA applications, you'd want to show your continuous physical presence in the United States. You would want to show, for example, bank statements, medical records that you were here, school records, transcripts, all of those show continuous physical presence. You need to show that you were in fact present on June 15, 2012. So again, it could be a school record, it could be a medical record, you went to the doctor that day, things like that, to show that presence from then until now. Obviously not having any crimes or anything like that, they're going to do a background check regarding those things. The filing fees, you'd have to provide those as well as passport style photos for your employment authorization. So it's mostly just really physical documents showing that you are either in school, that you graduated, that you were physically present on June 15, 2012, and all of your physical presence documents, such as bank statements, for example, showing that continuous presence in the US.
Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing all of that information and all of your insight and expertise with us, Angelita. We truly appreciate your time and all of your expertise sharing with us. This brings us to the end of our conversation. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you especially to Angelita for your time. To stay up to date, please subscribe and follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube pages. If you guys have any questions or suggestions, please reach out to us at info@chugh.com and join us back next week for more pressing topics that truly matter to you and your business. Until next time, stay safe and take care, everybody.